All right. Hey there, everybody. Scott here for Intoxicated by Grace. And I wanted just to take a few minutes to share a few things that have been going on over the last couple of days. It all stems from that wonderful site that many of you know and love, Facebook. I departed from Seventh-day Adventism 14 years ago, and I am still friends with a number of people on that site. And what has happened is over time, there's been conversations that have gone back and forth between myself and some of those friends. Some of them have been really good. Some of them have not. And what I would describe about the ones that have been taking place over the last 3 days would have been in the not category. And if I'm really being honest and really being genuine about it, I'm as much to blame. And what I mean by that is, when I get into conversations with Adventists, there's a number of things I want to do. One is I want to be patient, I want to be calm, and I want to be respectful. I think that's how Christ would want me to act. Which means I don't want to try to start using a bunch of sarcasm. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be belittling. But I'm telling you right now, when the same isn't being followed by the other party, it makes it very difficult. The story kind of goes like this. A friend of mine from back in high school had posted something. There's all these Adventist memes or these Adventist posts that just kind of go up with it, whether it's pictures of Ellen White or whatever the case is. And I just bite my tongue, and I've honestly tried to figure out a way. How can I just block them? Like I want to be their friend, but I just need to block them. Like I can't continue to see them all the time and see the garbage that they're saying, because I just couldn't resist the temptation. And so I dipped my toe into the water, and it didn't take long for the piranhas to boom, jump all over me. And I'm telling you right now, it was one on. A lot of the time it was 1-on-2, myself against these other two guys, but at times there were 3 or 4 of them all coming at me. And there was a time that I thought, I just got to find a way to gracefully get out of here. But then what happened is a girl that was reading the chats, she wasn't really chiming in, but she was just reading the back and forth, reached out to me privately and said, I get exactly where you're coming from. This is a Seventh-day Adventist. Like, I get where you're coming from. And then another guy chimed in, and he was like, I had the same questions. And there was this frustration towards Adventism from Adventists or former Adventists. And so when I heard that, I thought, okay, I probably need to continue on with this. I'll suffer through it. And what I discovered from this, and this is not, I'm not making a blanket statement about all Adventists, but it is absolutely true for some Adventists. And that is this. Many of them, myself included, they come from multi-generations of Adventism. Literally, it is all they've ever known. They know of no other theology. They know of no other interpretation of these verses. They know nothing else. So what I have to remember, and what you sometimes have to remember when you're dealing with them, is they think it's not like they know something else and they're choosing that. It's all they've ever known. And it's very similar to what I believe Jesus and the Pharisees had to deal with the Pharisees, in that a great example is this, because something I posted in that whole thread was, I'm writing this stuff, but I'm fully aware it's falling on deaf ears. And I said, the reason I know that is because when the disciples said to Jesus, hey, why do you keep talking to them in parables? He said, because the hidden things, the mysteries I've given to you, it's not given to them. He said, it's not given to them. He said, because if they heard it, their hearts would be converted. Think about that. He's like, if they really understood it, if I allowed them to truly hear it, they'd be converted. And this is why oftentimes in the Bible, you'll say, to those who have ears, let them hear. Well, everybody, the majority have ears. The point is, until the heart is truly ready, I don't care what argument you present to them, they will not hear it. They, in fact, cannot hear it. And I say this from my own personal experience as a born and raised Seventh-day Adventist who had tons of conversations with people outside of Adventism when I was an Adventist. They gave me some of the arguments that I hold dear to my heart today, rejected them. I was not ready for those. As if you've heard my testimony, God came to me about pork because that was that one law I could wrap my head around saying, all right, that doesn't count. You're not committing a sin if you eat bacon. But if he'd come to me and said, Scott, the Sabbath has been fulfilled in Christ, I would have said, get behind me, Satan. I was not ready to hear that. So that's the first thing that I'm really walking away from. My lesson from this huge thread is that they can't hear. The second is, if you ever meet a Seventh-day Adventist or people who've converted to it, they will tell you, they'll make statements like this: there's no other church, there's no other denomination that is so close to the Bible. And the more I think about it, I'm thinking, that's nuts. That's nuts. And I really do believe that one big place they get that from is Adventist. I can't say that it's an intentional thing. It's what they've been taught. But Adventists will do things like this. Now, understand, when I read the Bible, I'm reading it in English. Okay, I'm reading the Bible in English. But we all have to remember the Bible wasn't written in English. It was written in Hebrew. It was written in Greek and Aramaic. Those are the original languages. But we're reading it today in English. But to many, many Adventists, it seems like that fact totally escapes them. So what do you mean by that? What I mean by that is, like, when they'll say something like they love Revelation, they love Revelation 12:17, they love Revelation 19:10, and in both of these, they have the word commandments, and they always just see, that's the remnant church. They are the ones who have they keep the commandments of God. It frustrates me to no end is when you say to them, yes, but the Greek word for commandments there is very often entole or nomos. And these two words mean entirely different things. For instance, when a police officer commands me to pull over or commands me to do this or that, that's not a law. He is giving me an order. That right there would be entole. Nomos, on the other hand, in the Greek is almost always pointing to Mosaic law. And when you read like Revelation 12:17, they keep the commandments of God. What word do you think is there? They keep the commandments. It's not nomos. It's not Mosaic law. It is pointing to just commands or orders that God gives us. And we have the law of Christ. We have the commands. This is a new command I give to you, that you love each other. Those are the commands that we're talking about. But again, it goes back to Adventists not truly knowing the Bible and not being able to do their homework before they just speak in this way. Well, Scott says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Again, what is the word there? It's entole. But to them, it goes right back to that. So this is another thing that for me is very frustrating, is so very, very often they don't truly know the Bible. But moving on, another thing through this thread that became so painfully obvious to me is how little the Adventist understands the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Because they cannot wrap their minds around why I'm a Sunday keeper or why a person rejects the Sabbath. They cannot tell me one time where Jesus said, keep Sunday holy. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And I'll say to them, I acknowledge Sunday's not holy. Okay, you win. The point of the matter is this. It does not matter. You see, this is where I had to say to them, listen, the Ten Commandments are the terms of the covenant between God and Israel. Israel, not me, a Gentile, not you, probably a Gentile, but with God and the Israelites. And so he gives them the terms of the covenant. I'll be your God and you'll be my people. And he gives them the 10 commandments. And right in the very center is the sign of the covenant. That is the Sabbath. It is the sign of the covenant between God and Israel. And the thing that kills me is that no, the Sabbath was here in Genesis, even though the word Sabbath never appears until Exodus 16. They still want to say, and even though you cannot find a single passage where anyone was ever told in the Bible to obey the Sabbath, you don't see anyone keeping the Sabbath prior to Exodus 16. They still say it was here all the time. For people who say my theology has to come solely from the Bible, well, you're building this entirely on silence. Do I acknowledge that God rested from his work? Yes, I do. And I also acknowledge that once sin entered, God went back to work. That's what John 5, 16 and 17 says. 17 says, the Father has always been working until now, and I am working. As soon as sin entered, God's Sabbath ended. And so when you have the old covenant, presented, and the sign there is to say, this is what you're going to do to remember that. This is how people will see you, that they will know you are my people. There was a number of things that the Jews would do. The way that they ate, the way that they dressed, the way that they would treat the seventh day of the week. These were all signs that they had a covenant with God. But when Jesus Christ comes, the old is gone and the new has come. And this is where their minds start melting. So when you hear them say, well, the law, so when we say the law was nailed to the cross, well, they say, well, that's the ceremonial law. Even though nowhere in the Bible, from Genesis until Revelation, do you ever see the term ceremonial or moral law. You see it all held as one component, but the Adventists need separation because they need the fourth commandment to stay. They cannot understand the difference between the old covenant and the new covenant. Their minds cannot fathom that. And I think part of it is because, and you've probably heard them say something to you like this, oh, so now it's good. You can now steal and you can now. And so you have to just control yourself because it's such a ludicrous thing. You see, this is what the thing is. If the law is done, Adventists will say the Sabbath existed before the Ten Commandments. So they'd say, even if the Ten Commandments are gone, the Sabbath is still there. So for them, the Sabbath can exist before, during, and after. Okay, I don't agree with you, but you seem to be okay with that concept of something existing before, during, and after that. Well, what about stealing? Are you telling me that stealing was okay before, but it was only outlawed when in Exodus 20? No, stealing had always been wrong. Murder since Cain killed Abel, murder was wrong. So these laws that we see in the Ten Commandments, the truly moral laws were in the Ten Commandments well before Exodus 20. And they have in turn continued to exist after Exodus 20. But no one prior to Exodus 16 had ever kept the Sabbath. No human, only God had rested. But nobody else had done it. No one else had been commanded to do it until Exodus 16. And then in Exodus 28, that's when we see the fourth commandment. And that's why now, when the new covenant comes in between God and Jesus, now when that covenant, the new covenant comes in, that we're just benefiting from through our faith in him, that's why this thing of law doesn't matter. What we now move away from law is we move now into living by the Spirit. You see, the Sabbath was ceremonial. The Sabbath was ceremonial. It was ritualistic. If you don't believe me, go to Leviticus 23. And in Leviticus 23, you'll see all the different ceremonial laws. The Passover, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Tabernacles. Oh, and by the way, the very first one listed there in Leviticus 23, the Sabbath. But you want to tell me that the Sabbath it's moral? And ask an Adventist sometime, why is it moral? Why is the Sabbath moral? You know what their answer is going to be every single time? Because it's in the Ten Commandments. Because of where it was written, that is why. The funny thing to me is some things I've studied recently was that the Jews came to there was a sign of there was another covenant. There was the covenant with Abraham, and the sign of that covenant, was circumcision. And then later on, now with Israel, God makes this new covenant, and the sign in that one is the Sabbath. So we have circumcision and we have the Sabbath. And then we know that circumcision is supposed to occur on the 8th day. A baby boy is born. 8 days later, he's supposed to go in and be circumcised. And so they realized, hold on, what if that 8th day is the Sabbath? That would be working. And the answer came, what do you do? And the answer was, you circumcise, because that is work. You are doing a work. You are breaking the Sabbath. You're either resting or you're not. And if you do that, and if the 8th day falls on the Sabbath, you do it because circumcision is greater than the Sabbath. What? Yes, that sign is more important because you can't even keep the Sabbath. In Judaism, you weren't even allowed to keep the Sabbath until you had been circumcised. So that one was more important than the other. It's almost similar in the New Covenant. In the New Covenant, there's two things that happen. One, you're baptized, and the second is communion. And the funny thing is about communion is he says, do this in remembrance of me. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Do this in remembrance of me. Do it continually, as often as you come together. So are you committing a sin if you haven't taken communion in a year? No. So those are some things that frustrated me. The fact that they cannot see that it's ceremonial. There was a guy I was dealing with, again, even just tonight, even in the posts of some of these videos I've posted, who I've made this argument before, and I'm not the only one. Dale Ratzliff has made the argument as well, is how did Jesus see the Sabbath? And Jesus saw the Sabbath, it would appear, as ceremonial. And the reason I say that is because when the disciples are walking through the fields and they are breaking they're breaking the thing and they're eating it, and the Pharisees, whoever, comes up and go, hey, they're breaking the Sabbath. Never does Jesus go, no, they're not. He never says, no, they're not. They're not breaking it. He simply says, didn't you read about when David and his companions went into the temple and ate the bread of the presence, the bread that was consecrated, which it was not lawful for them to do, and yet they were innocent? And don't you know that every week the priests profane the Sabbath, and yet they are guiltless? And so I always ask Adventists, what kind of laws is he comparing the Sabbath to? Eating the consecrated bread in the temple, sacrificial. The priests going in and every Sabbath. What law? Ceremonial. And also, please note, did David break that commandment? Yes, he did. He's not supposed to do it. The point is, Jesus himself is saying, listen, you are breaking it. Please don't misunderstand. You are breaking that. But if it is all the motive behind it, that's why Jesus says it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. If your ox is in a ditch, you go get it out. Don't make a mistake. For a Jew to have cooked probably food for themselves on the Sabbath would have been breaking the Sabbath. But cooking, again, the same amount of work, if it was giving it to a person who was dying, would not have been considered unlawful. So when Jesus says, and they came to him, and this is in John, this is pretty powerful to me. This is John 5:16 through, here you go. I'll just read this, and this is where we'll end for tonight. But this is John 5, 16, 17, 18, and 19. And this is what he says. He says, and this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father is working until now, and I am working. This is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling his own Father He was even calling God his own father, making himself equal with God. Now, what's interesting to me about that last section there, that last statement where it says, not only was he breaking the Sabbath, that's one, but he was also, but he was calling God his own father, making himself equal to God. The question I would ask the Adventist, because an Adventist immediately is going to go, no, he wasn't really breaking it. Well, the Bible says he was breaking it. Furthermore, so if you're saying that really didn't happen, but they're just claiming he did, well, tell me about the other two offenses. Did he not actually call? Did he actually not make himself? He says he was even calling God his own father. Did he not really call God his father? And by doing so, was he really not making himself equal with God? In one sentence, are you telling me this portion is accurate, but this portion here, what you have to understand is nonsense? Jesus broke the Sabbath. You know what I mean? Because he worked. He admitted to working on the Sabbath. He could not have said it any clearer. I swear to you, I'm going to be doing a series, or I'm going to do some videos on Galatians, because that was a book that was referenced in this thread a number of times. I promise you I will do it soon. So hope you guys are doing well. God bless you. And my closing remarks is this: be patient with the Adventist. For some of them, it's all they've ever known. They have scales on their eyes. They have no ears. Remember that. Be patient and pray for them. That's all that I can say. God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time.